You ever notice how with predominantly white churches, you'll see black people on stage but rarely behind the scenes, singing, playing, shouting. But when it comes to actual decision making, leadership, or vision casting, we're not there. I've been that guy. Played keys for years. I watched others who look like me stay on the platform while the leadership stayed white. Even when we had deep thoughts, experiences, and convictions, we were never safe enough to be handed the mic during conversations that actually mattered. And when issues hit the black community, like police shootings or racial injustice, we got silence, or worse, a vague prayer for unity, but never the courage to name the pain. It's not just about hurt feelings. It's being invisible in a place that claims to see everyone. And here's what I realized. Being tolerated is not the same as being valued. Having a gift is not the same as having a voice. If you've ever felt this or even wrestled with it, I'm diving deeper into this topic on my new channel. We're talking real talk, no filters, no gaslighting. Follow me at After the Amen to hear stories that nobody's telling, but everyone's feeling. Let's go there together.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Belonging Life podcast. My name is Demetrius, and of course, I am the host. And I'm really excited about the conversation that I'm going to have today with a gentleman that I met, like many of my guests on TikTok. I was just sharing with him how fortunate I've been able to have the opportunity to have met with several of you and several of my guests and been able to allow for there to be some really good, genuine conversation. And so I want you to sit back and just enjoy this opportunity that you have to hear from Chris. I'm going to allow Chris to introduce himself. But before he does, I'm going to tell you why Chris and I are here today. So there's a couple of things I want to share with you up front. It might be typically, I would say it'd be a good time for you to hop off if you're going to be sensitive to a topic that's maybe a hot topic for you. But I actually want to encourage you to stay. I actually want to encourage you to stay. I want to encourage you to sit. I want to encourage you to consider what you hear today. I want you to use where you've been, but I also want you to lay that aside when you hear something and make room for something else that you might hear today that may not fit a narrative that you believe in or something that you see or something that you even understand. And with that being said, this conversation is a conversation that I certainly would understand some other people who share the same skin as Chris and I do would also understand. And you may not, but it's a good opportunity to be educated, to learn, to grow, and to see something, right, beyond where you are and to understand something. And maybe in the context where you are, where you worship, to perhaps maybe pay close attention to the person who might be in the situation where Chris was in that he was speaking of that I've been in, and then we can have you can have some dialogue with that person. I promise you that person will appreciate you having that dialogue with them. I promise you 100%. So with that being said, everybody, again, this is Chris Moses. I just met him. So Chris, thank you so much for being here this morning and just taking this opportunity, man, again, to have a conversation, have some questions for you that we're going to go over. But tell everybody who you are, Chris. Anything you want people to know about you that's pertinent.
Sure. First off, I just want to thank you, Demetrius, for having me. I really appreciate you creating this space for a conversation because, as you and I know, it's not always easy to talk honestly about race and about faith and about the intersectionality of those two without it turning into a debate. As you can see, if you've read some of the comment section of my video. By way of intro, I'm Chris Moses. I'm a content creator and I'm an online music teacher and also a coach, right? And so I help musicians, especially those that are in church spaces, to develop both their skills and their influence, so they can show up fully in what they do without burning out. I also create content that dives into the culture of church, the beauty, the tension, and the hard truths that we sometimes avoid. So today, I'm not just here to tell my story, but I'd like to connect it to a bigger picture and one that I think that a lot of people will recognize. And even if they've never had a language for it, hopefully they can pick that up today.
You see, everybody, we already got started. He's already there. He said all these words already that I love: the beauty, the tension, the culture, all these things. These are some of the nuances, everybody, that we don't really get a chance to talk about on Sundays, and a lot of times aren't talked about in circles. that we should have at church because we do live amongst one another. And I think it's really important for us to be able to have these conversations. With that said, Chris, thanks so much for the introduction. Again, it's my honor to have you as a guest. But Chris and I are just going to have a conversation. And so you all get to sit in on it. And so, with that being said, Chris, let's talk about the video. The video that I saw on TikTok was you, and you correct me if I go in error here in any way, was you talking about what it was like being black in some white spaces and not having some of the um, same outcomes,
Yep.
interactions, opportunities, things along those lines in those spaces, yet being faithful in those spaces, but also to a large degree, fully being aware of the fact that you're being told this is as far as this goes. Even if it wasn't in those terms, it was implied, it was inferred, and it was made clear, either through silence sometimes, and maybe sometimes through body language and or verbiage. So, um, can you
Sure.
just kind of highlight the video, and then we'll get into some more of the questions?
Sure, absolutely. And yeah, speaking of the video, before I actually jump into my story, I do want to give some credit and maybe a little context for how I even landed on the language that I'm going to use today. I recently posted this video, right? And it was talking about what it's like navigating predominantly white churches and the lack of representation in leadership. And it got a lot of traction. In one comment in particular, though, it stood out to me because somebody dropped a screenshot of a book called The Religion of Whiteness. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's by Dr. Michael O. Emerson and Dr. Bracey's the last name, Glenn E. Bracey. And I said, all right, let me see what this is about. So reading that book was like finally getting the instruction manual for this weird feeling that I've been having inside. I've been living with my whole life. And that moment when the new words kind of hit your vocabulary and then you realize, okay, this is what I've been dealing with this entire time. And that was me. And these two doctors, they've spent years studying how whiteness operates inside of American Christianity, and not just through an individual basis, but as a whole religious system. And this is something that they define as the religion of whiteness, or the ROW. And as a powerful, they really introduce it. They introduce it as a powerful intruder. This is the language that they use within the portions of the church that has its own theology, its own cultural rules, and its own guardians. And I'm going to give a little spoiler alert. The mission of the book is to protect whiteness, not Jesus. And the way they broke it down, they looked at it, they broke it down in these two categories, or these two main groups. And they're referred to as white veils and white might. So the white veils are the kind of the bless your heart kind of people. And this is the crowd who tried to, hide racism under niceness. And then there's the white might. These are the people that are more forceful. These are the folks that'll shut you down directly if you step out of line. It's a different style, but the same playbook. And so when I read their words, I started flashing back to the moments of my own story. These are the things that I brushed off as just awkward church politics. Nope. Turns out that they were not random at all. They were symptoms of a system. And you see this system. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
Go ahead. You can finish.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So basically, just to get into the questions now, like, the first time I realized, right, that I was in a different type of space. I didn't realize it at first because the church that I grew up in, it was a church that was culturally black, but it eventually became, well, it was culturally black, culturally white initially. All right. It became culturally black because I started going there when I was about 10 years old.
Okay.
And we had a lot of white Italian families, but over time they quietly left. I never really thought much about it. I mean, I'm 10 years old. But our pastor was actually a white man from Indiana. And this is one of the most culturally curious people you've ever met in your life. The man spoke fluent Spanish.
Wow.
He celebrated Black history, and he never made your skin color a thing that he would see first. All right. This was never the first thing about you. He was just a solid dude, addicted to Diet Coke, but great guy. And, yeah, he was an awesome guy. Always wanted me to run to the store and, go to the Pakistani guy around the corner and go grab him
Yeah.
the Diet Cokes. But of course, we all got our vices. I mean, this is my normal,
Sure.
you know. Now, my wife and I, because you brought up your wife earlier, my wife is of mixed race heritage, right? And we went back to her old church. We left where we were going in Queens in New York, and we went to her old church. And
I
this
can
is
hear that. I heard the New York, by the way. I
yeah,
heard the
yeah,
New
yeah, yeah,
York coming
sure.
out.
Yeah. So we started going to this old church. And this church was more conservative, it was more white led, and it had that kind of polish that says, we got the meetings about the meetings. So I looked up at the platform, man, it was all white, except
Yeah,
for one Jamaican brother who stood out like a curry stain on a white dress shirt. All right. The culture was unspoken, but it was clear. You could serve,
sure.
from inside their frame. Even musically. I remember they had a beautiful it was a C3 organ. You have two types of organ, you have the B3 and the C3. Same difference, it's just that the cabinet is a little bit different, but it's the same exact sound and everything. So you have that sound that we grew up with in church, at least I grew up.
Yes.
So, but it might as well have been a coat rack. No preacher chords, no call and response. And that's when I realized, oh, okay, I'm not just a musician here. I'm a black man in a white space.
Mm.
And that comes with rules. So no one talks about it out loud, but everyone kind of expects you to know.
There's a lot there. And for the people who are listening, um, I know that there are going to be some people who are like, and I've had this because one of the things that Chris did ask me, you all, when I did invite him to this interview, was he said, "Hey," which I totally appreciated. He said, "Hey, let me make sure we are on the same page in terms of the messaging we're trying to get out. The thing that's important to us. I don't want to just be there." And so I appreciated that. And so I have put um, videos out like this, content out like this, talking about navigating this space. In fact, I put one out in 22 and I lost some people behind it. I'm probably going to lose some people behind this. And that's okay because it has to be talked about because it's a reality. We cannot just ignore it and try to sprinkle Jesus on it. We just throw a little Jesus on it and brother, I love you. Don't worry that brother. No, no, no. This space is determined by all of these other things. Well, anyway, because one of the comments that I got, and I remember it, which also came up to me when I saw your video, was this guy said to me, he said, "Hey man, I got a question for you." And I said, "Sure." This was on my YouTube channel. He said, "Why do you want to force yourself into
Mhm.
white spaces?" And I said, "Let me think about your question for a moment." I got back to him a few minutes later because we were typing back and forth. And I said, "If this was not a church, I would think that your question is valid. But because we are talking about the body of Christ, believers,
Right,
Christ followers, I said, I can't go along with your question because I wouldn't be forcing myself into a space that is exclusively white, black, brown, or anything else. I said, it's the body of Christ.
right. Mhm.
So I said, if I cannot go there, this isn't a question of forcing myself into a space where I'm not welcome. I'm wondering which part of Christ is being represented in this
Right,
space that excludes me.
right,
Oh man, he goes starts trying to explain to me, man, this, that, other. But if they don't want you there, man, there's plenty of. I said no. I said that's not the point. That's not the point. And I had to explain to him at the time. I planted two churches. I planted one in '09 and another one in 15. And I pastored both of those for about 5 years apiece, and they're very diverse, incredibly diverse. Some of that had to do with me and my wife. A lot of that had to do with the intention, though, Chris, which is other stuff we're going to get into here in the next 40 minutes or so. But was the intention? My board was diverse. My leadership was diverse, right? And the people that were a part of what we were doing were diverse. and we spoke it and we celebrated. And it was something I talked about from the pulpit. It was something that I talked about from the fact that, listen, all of us are image bearers.
That's right.
And you are welcome here, regardless of where you've come from. There's no, this is where this kind of church and that kind of church. And I was explaining to this guy, I'm only attempting to represent Christ, period, in the story. And I said, people are welcomed here. I said, now, what we do here may be a little different. They may not be used to what we do here, but this is a beautiful opportunity to get involved and to connect. And I didn't call it black, I didn't call it white. I said, we just, and in addition to that, I said, we may not be for everybody, but we're for somebody. So, anyway, how do you feel about that question? Is what I wanted to ask you about, quote, forcing yourself into white spaces as it only pertains to church. If I was going to a Klan meeting, that'd be different. But I'm talking about church.
What people forget, I think, oftentimes is that context is important. Context is it defines a lot, and you just brought up a context about whether if it's a Klan meeting or if it's a business meeting or if it's church, and it's an entirely different context because you're not welcome there. It's predicated on racism. It's predicated on division, predicated on hate, and once that's the foundation, well, that's where things are going to go from there because it's made up of that substance. But now, when we're talking about a space and a place like a church or a religious organization,
Yeah.
this space is supposed to be inclusive as far as we know, and culturally we know as "come as you are, everyone is welcome." But I don't want to get into it just yet because I was looking. There's some things that I wanted to talk about later on. I'm going to bring it up and exactly what you're speaking of. It
Okay.
depends who says it. There's a sort of protection there when you say something about, it depends if the person is black or white, or even they don't even have to be black or white. They can be either because you
Okay.
have protectors of this role or this religion of whiteness. But in this case, in this context that you're talking about, I think that when people say, hey, to get out that space, you shouldn't be there. Well, if we approach it with that kind of attitude, who does it benefit when silence is to brought to the fore, when silence is brought forward instead of challenging,
Yeah.
these assumptions and challenging these things. If we're all
Yeah.
supposed to be one in Christ, because then it just becomes, well, they don't want us in our space. We don't progress forward with unity. Let them do their thing, and we'll do our thing. And it's antithetical to the message of Christ.
Antithetical. 100%. 100%. The book that you brought up, I'm aware of the book. There's two other books that I've read. I don't know if you read Jesus and John Wayne,
No, I've heard of it.
Christian Dumais. Incredible book. It blows your mind. And the other book that was well, there's a couple of them. Um, the Whiteness of the Gospel. I'm trying to remember that gentleman's name, and then there's another guy who just recently he did a whole um, like a autobiography type of deal on the whole thing. And he was on the news. They kept interviewing him. He came from a predominantly um, white space in the South. And, he just remembers after leaving there and going to school and going and being exposed to other people, he was like, well, wait a minute, like what's going on here? But he didn't realize it when he was just in it.
Right.
But when he left it, and he was like, well, wait a minute, these people love God like I do, and so on and so forth. But he would go back. And now he's actually an outsider to his church. And he actually got some threats here more recently in this last election because he was speaking up against things about what he considered to be a mix of, hey, this isn't the gospel, and you're trying to turn this
Yeah.
into the gospel, political, so on and so forth. And so, yeah, I appreciate the people who are writing about it who don't look like us, but who are aware
Right.
of it and who are trying to bring some people to that. And again, there are some of you who are like, I already don't want to listen to this, so on and so forth. But I'm telling you, stick around and hear it out so that you can learn something. And guess what? I'm going to have Chris give you his information at the end of this if you have questions for him. and I'll give you my information. You have questions for me. The point is not to argue. The point is to get to what truth is and to understand what truth is and how, if you're a believer on here, now, if you're not a believer, you can criticize this all you want to, because I understand that you don't share the same value system that Chris and I do, or that believers do in general. But if you are a believer, you have to be willing to take a look at this in your life and ask, if you fit in this space, if you've been the person in this space, different things along those lines, and how that might impact other people. But let me ask Chris this question, because I wanted to start with his story, because I knew there was a story behind it. And so, when did you first realize that being black in predominantly white church spaces came with different weight or expectations?
Like I said before, I mentioned about me not realizing this because of where I grew up. It was just culturally black. The pastor that I had, I didn't, like I said, I knew he was white, but somebody would say to me, man, it's a white man. I didn't see him as like that at all. And so having that kind of expectation, it translated very differently when I went other places. My wife is of mixed race heritage. Now, she's part white and Caribbean. So now, me recently talking to her about these things, she goes, Chris, I didn't realize that you felt this way. I said, well, yeah, this is something that I dealt with my entire life.
Hmm.
I'm not going to run home to you, 22 years of marriage and be like, this thing happened to me today. There was a microaggression. And she realizes it. And it's something, as a black man, you are in society. You do things to cause people to feel easy about themselves. You tap down whatever it is. If it's a talent, your voice, we all code switch. There's just different things that we do. I'm walking behind a white woman at night. I'm going
Yeah,
to cross the street. I
yeah,
mean, whistle, all just to kind of get her attention and smile and nod and kind of shuck it up a bit, just to show her, hey, I'm no threat.
I'm safe.
I'm safe because of what and so it's not like my typical self is unsafe, but she's been taught, likely, by society, by the media, that hey, I'm a threat, I'm dangerous. So when you
Yeah,
enter these spaces, it's something that you're cognizant of, and then you're reminded of it in Alexa, stop. Sorry. So you're constantly reminded of this issue when different situations come up, whether it's something that it's done as in you have rhythm, it could be something that's innocuous, or you guys are great athletes. It's like a left-handed compliment, and you're reminded of this in some of these spaces. Particularly in church, you're not going to be the one that's calling the shots. Ultimately, you're going to be there's no problem putting you on the stage as far as singing, as far as leading worship, as far as playing. But to be in the room where it happens, there's not much representation, if any, at all. So you begin to see these things. You begin to see it play out, like in some of the churches that I've been in. A lot of them in the organization, the leaders are put in the front and they're given seats on the platform. And then there's the one black guy, but there's no one else at all. And that person is not even somebody that is gonna. He may be consulted for some things, but I know that there's no power there. And I know this. I knew this for a fact because I had a conversation with them. This is around the time Obama was elected.
mm,
Um, when we were talking about the things and how a lot of the Republicans were blocking everything that he was doing, and I was starting to
mm.
become irritated about it. And he looks at me, he goes, Shh, keep your voice down, in the Jamaican accent. I was like, I'm not yelling, but all of this is to change who you are, to not be true to who you are, not to get anybody else to change, but at least to get them to bring these conversations to the table. Let's at least discuss it. And that's how I knew it wasn't going to get anywhere.
Okay. Yeah, there's there's so much to that, man. Again, and we are talking about just conversations, because we are talking about just starting conversations, people sitting down, educating themselves, seeing. But I also understand too that it's kind of it's a built-in system,
Yeah.
and they're used to it. And again, this is definitely going to be hard for some of the people that I know that are white men. You're going to struggle, and you're going to struggle with me. But I'm fine with you struggling with me because if you know me all this time, you can have a conversation with me. Here's what the reality is. Even what Chris just said about this whole having to play safe with everybody. Church is the last place I want to do that. In society and culture, I get some of that. But I don't expect that from people who share the same spiritual DNA that I do. I don't expect that from you. I expect you to be rooted and grounded enough in truth and understanding what that is and seeing me as an image bearer.
Right.
That I'm made in the same image that you're made in, that you still see me as a man, and that you can celebrate that we aren't the same culturally, but that we are different and the way that we do things are different. One of the things that I think is really important for us to just kind of highlight is this ideal of tamping down who you are so that other people can feel safe around you. Um, you know, people, I'm just going to be kind of raw right here. I don't want to veer off too far. I'm going to be kind of raw. Um, One of my neighbors asked me, uh, hey, is it possible for you to check on, you know, my house, so on and so forth? Well, I'm not here. Well, Caucasian man. I I sent my wife next door. I did not go next door because his wife is still there. Just the perception of those things are there. And so I had to explain to him when he came back. He's like, "Oh yeah, my wife said you sent, you came over." I said, "Yeah, she came to check on you and so on and so forth." And one day he asked me to sit down and talk. So we were sitting down and we were talking, and I told him, I said, "There's certain things I don't do." I said, because the perception is there. And he's like, "Oh, I would never." And I said, "Even if you wouldn't." I said, everybody else around here, I said, that's just the way that it goes. And I said, we live with that all day, every day. We understand that. And so just going into spaces again, having to calm ourselves down and so on and so forth. But we don't expect that. I don't. I can't speak for Chris, but again, because of the content and the context of what he said, we are talking about Christian spaces, going in them, being black, and still having these same experiences. To some degree, again, we understand culture because we're not dealing with people who have uh, a mindset that comes from the kingdom. We're dealing with people who are unregenerated, right? And aren't thinking the same way that we would. But Chris, talk about what it's looked like for you emotionally and spiritually in spaces where you weren't sure if you were welcome. Like, what's the emotional and spiritual kind of baggage or feelings that come with that?
Honestly, there's been a strange mix of disorientation and a kind of quiet grief. Here's the thing, like you can be told you're loved and appreciated and even celebrated and still know that there's like a ceiling over you. And in those spaces, right, I learned pretty quickly. You can bring your gift, there's no problem with that. But maybe not your whole culture. You can serve, but don't bring too much truth into that space about race. You can lead worship, but you want to kind of keep it polite. After a while, it just wears on you. It gets really tiring because you're scared. And it takes energy to keep shrinking yourself. This is what you're doing, to fit into the room. And, I'm talking about subtle stuff, changing my musical approach, choosing my words carefully, scanning for reactions before I speak. It's like you're running a cultural TSA check on yourself before every interaction.
Yeah.
So, after reading this book, The Religion of Whiteness, it gave me the language for it. And I think that's what a lot of people need. And one of the terms that they use is betrayal trauma. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but this is something that it's an idea that you're looking to the people that you're supposed to look for support, right? Or for spiritual safety. That becomes the source of your hurt. And the kicker is this: it's not just pain. It's like I said, it's disorientation. You start asking yourself, "Am I remembering this right? Am I overreacting?
Mm.
Oh, you're just living in pieces instead of whole.
I, ooh, man, I'm trying to just stick with the rhythm here, but what you're saying is like even really resonating with me, right? The whole it is disorienting. And I don't think people understand that. Now there's gonna be some people who look like us, who
Mm,
are us, who this is gonna match for you, and you're gonna now have language, as Chris alluded to, you're gonna have some language around what you've been experiencing, what you've been feeling, and maybe ignoring the whole ideal of too. I'm writing some stuff down that he's saying the ideal of shrinking yourself to fit in. Bring your gift, but not all of your culture. Like we'll celebrate this, but not this in you. These are things that are painful, and people oftentimes try to spiritualize and be like, brother, don't let that get in the way of the spirit of God. And it's like you're like, yeah, it's totally in the way. This whole thing is in the way, right? And you being dismissive of what I'm experiencing in this space isn't helping either, because you're telling me that you love me, as you alluded to, right? Yeah, you love me. Which part of me do you love? Because I'm not sure. I don't know which part of me you love. You love what I bring to the table. You love what I do for your ministry. You love all these kind of things and so on and so forth. In fact, man, I was at a place where I doctrinally disagree with these people. I will not say the name of the place or whatever, but doctrinally we don't stand on the same. But I really enjoyed the pastor, had a great relationship with the pastor. Um, and um, they were, I was definitely an anomaly. They were wondering, like, why isn't this dude pastoring? This was 3 years ago. They're like, why isn't this dude? Because I stopped pastoring right where COVID hit. Um, and they were wondering, like, we know this dude's a pastor. They knew all this stuff. They're like, oh yeah, we saw your YouTube stuff, we did that, so on and so forth. How can we help you? And I was like, it's the church, man. I'm here. My wife and my younger daughter at the time. I was like, we're just here. It's a church. We heard the pastor online, and how can you help me? How can you help me? It was almost like like why like is there are you in the wrong place? Did what do you need? So anyway, I was there for about 6 to 8 months. And eventually, man, they came and they were like, we you know what we want to do, brother? We just want to give you a building. You go start a church. And I was like, what? I literally, all this stuff came up from your video. I realized they were like, we just don't want you in this space, but we're happy to give you a space that you go over here and go do this, because they were like, why are you just sitting here? It wasn't really a spiritual, like, hey man, we really feel like the Lord is telling us that this is what we're supposed to do for you. It was kind of like, yeah, no, we actually would like for you to scoot out. Now, while there were other people who looked like me in that space, there were people who weren't me, if that makes sense to you, at the
mm,
level that I had been in there. And I could tell it was uncomfortable for
mm.
them. It was just totally uncomfortable for them. And you know what? I was coming to the service, started at 8:30, was done at 9:30, and we were gone. We left, went to breakfast, did what we did, right? I was like, this is good. I was like, I don't feel like the Lord's calling me back into that space. So now I run a Bible study. I create content, right? And I'm a certified life coach with working on getting some trauma informed certifications here as we speak. And
Amen.
so I'm like, this is what I believe I'm supposed to do. I'm 55 years old. I'm gonna be 56 here shortly, and it's like I'm good. Like, I don't know, but I realized that I was interrupting their space, and their way to move me was to literally offer me a building somewhere else to be like, we need you to scoot along. There was no, we really feel like you should still be back pastoring. It's like, yeah, hey, take this and go do this. Go knock yourself out. Matter of fact, you don't even pay us for a whole year. You just be in there. And I was like,
Wow.
okay. I didn't go to them and say, hey, I want to pastor a church. I'm interested in pastoring the church. What can you guys do? I didn't any of those things. And so I had to wrestle with that for a little while. to the point of what you just said, which is the reason why I told this story, Chris, am I overthinking what happened here, or is this actually what happened? Because you start to some degree become disoriented
Yeah.
in what's going on around you because you start to think to yourself, am I going a little crazy here? Am I feeling a little crazy here? Am I assessing this appropriately? Am I discerning this well? Am I discerning this right? So yeah, I think that's a really important thing for people to know, man. And so thank you so much for sharing that. The other question I wanted to ask you this is, can you talk about what it felt like to be the only one in the room? And I know we talked about it being disorienting, but what kind of toll does it take on you after a little while of being in that space and, you being the only one in the room? Like, for example, the people who were sitting up front and then there's Chris.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of what you were just saying made me think of an author. So being the only one in the room, man, like it's like having two camera angles running on your life at all times, right? So one is the I'm here to serve and worship shot. The other is let me scan this room and see who is about to say something sideways kind of shot. W.E.B. Du Bois, he has a book of essays. It's referred to it's called the Soul of Black Folks and something about essays, right? But in it, he talks about double consciousness. And this is defined as you're always seeing yourself through someone else's eyes while trying to live from your own. And I've been in rooms where somebody thought it'd be hilarious to refer to Black children as nigglets. These are people that are at the church, playing at the church, running the sound at the church where I am. And I'm at this party, only Black guy at the table. It was about maybe 4 or 5 of us. When I pushed back, suddenly I was the one making it awkward. My response was, well, what if I referred to you as a honky or a
Mm-hmm.
Black,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I wasn't saying this, I wasn't trying to be slick. It wasn't even a retort to what they said. I wanted them to think about what they were saying and
Same.
how
Yes.
ridiculous it was. And they got offended, looked at me. That wouldn't be right. So my response was, so it's okay for, I call him George, for George to make these kind of jokes. And as you referred to earlier, it is different when you're in a space that where people are unregenerate, they're not religious, they don't know God, they don't have Jesus in them, and so they say things, and you're like, yeah, you're losing your mind. It's not good, but you would expect that. But
Right.
in this space, it does bring about this kind of exhaustion. All right. I've had people tell me, you're not Black because, like, it was a compliment because I didn't fit their stereotype. These are
I
people that
see.
go
Right.
to the church. It's tiring.
Right.
It's exhausting. And then you start self-editing. All right. Not because you want to, but because you get tired of wondering when you'll be labeled as divisive. Yeah. You're in the service. Yeah. But you're also managing your own existence inside of it. And there's no altar call for that kind of fatigue. On the side, this is what black fatigue means because people have used it, and some people are misinformed. Some misinformed white people have used it and to try to disparage black people online. But this is really what black fatigue is, as far as the church space is concerned.
Oh my gosh. You said so much that I had to write that down. Oh man. But you just please hear this, everybody. Please, please, if I want you all to take the opportunity to digest what you just heard Chris say. Just sit with it for a minute because he said something in here in the end that was profound, and it's a weight that's heavy for me that I have felt. There is no altar call for that type of fatigue. There isn't one. There is no altar call for that. And that's the weight of the things that are felt by those of us who have encountered the very conversations and things that we're having here today. That's the weight that we feel. The ideal of editing yourself constantly trying to do that, right? With people. Um, yeah, it's something that I won't do. It's something that I refuse to do. And I can't say, Chris, with full transparency, that I hadn't edited myself before because I understood where I was and how if I didn't, that experience was going to be over fairly quickly.
Sure.
And that I was going to be seen as not a fit, divisive, ill-equipped for whatever was going on, so on and so forth. So you're constantly in that space. And again, everybody, as Christians, we shouldn't have to feel this way. But we should be having these conversations. And for the people that it's uncomfortable with, um, again, using words like that, niglet, and all these other kind of things, you're just coming short of saying what you probably already fully say behind doors. The things that you say when you're with other people. And do you see the contradiction of walking up to your brother or sister in Christ after having these terrible conversations with other people and then hugging on them and telling them you love them and God bless you and all this other kind of stuff, or being in a prayer meeting with them, a prayer circle, or standing next to them without knowing them in church, and the leader or whoever's speaking says, grab the person's hand who's next to you, is going to pray and ask God for these things today for everybody in this space, but you really feel some kind of way about this person that you're standing next to. It's tragic, that we even have to be dealing with stuff like this. And so it's truly unfortunate. People shouldn't have to edit themselves to be around you, but we do, in those spaces for sure. There's a certain way that we have to talk. There's a certain way we have to present. Just everything. Otherwise, it's seen as aggressive. It's
Sure.
just seen as aggressive, not the kind of stuff that somebody who doesn't look like us could do, and they would just be like, "Oh, that's just Jerry." But for Chris and I, hey brother, we need you to calm down. It turns into a whole different thing, right? The whole scope of it is seen differently. Um, you said being gifted isn't the same as having a voice. Can you kind of unpack that for us a little bit?
Being gifted will get you into the room, right? So having a voice means you're trusted once you're in the room. And these are two different planets. At my wife's church, they knew my background. I'd met some of them prior to going there. And actually, at the church I was going to, I was a music director. I was the MD there. I led full bands. I arranged complex songs. But when I started going to the church, I got placed with the youth choir, which was fine, but it wasn't about skill. It was about where they thought or they felt I belonged in the order of things. One time I suggested that I would get behind the preacher on the organ, all right? And this is a totally normal thing to do in the black church,
Sure.
right? In black church culture. The bass player, he looks at me and says, "We don't do organ solos here." I'm thinking, first of all, that's not even what I said, but that told me all I needed to know. I mean, it's not a jazz improv. I understand that. We're in church, but it wasn't about ability. It was about keeping the culture exactly how they wanted it.
Yeah.
And so being gifted means that they like what you can do. Having a voice means that they value what they having a voice means that they value what you see. And in some spaces, they'll take the first all day and quietly just shut down the second.
So true. They'll take the first all day and quietly shut down the second. Just let me have you stretch that out a little bit more. When people are silent, what are your thoughts about that? How, if you were telling somebody to deal with that right now, what would you say to them?
Like another black person that
Yes.
is dealing with something like this.
Yeah.
And
The
yeah,
voice was shut down. The gift was there, but the voice was shut down. What would you say to them today?
I would tell them, I said, look, you have friends or people that you think are friends. I was going to get to this at the end. This is, but you're looking for affirmation. The problem is, and honestly, you will look and you're not going to find it. You're not going to see it. It's sad, but that's the unfortunate thing. This is why we have communities. I know we're not at that point in the podcast yet, but we have communities and things that I've started and what you're doing right now, and it gives people a chance to speak. It gives people a chance to talk about these hurts and to talk about these betrayal traumas. Because once we talk about them, we can name them. And once we name them, that's where the healing begins.
Absolutely. Betrayal trauma. I love that. Because that's what it is. And even as I'm studying this out, I realize, and for those of you who maybe aren't acquainted with trauma language, one of my daughters is also a family therapist. My wife is a medical professional as well. I will say this to you. Trauma is not the event itself, it's what lives in you after the event and how you navigate life afterwards. And so these things are traumatic to us and they're very difficult. And that's where people don't understand. They're like, oh, brother, that happened in 96. Trauma is not the event, it's what happens after the event and how you live around what took place with you. And that's why people just struggle with understanding that
Yeah.
you want to distance yourself from it. You want to tell us distance. Well, when did that happen, brother? You're like, oh, it happened back then and there. You're like, and you're still, brother. Jesus, he
Yeah.
redeemed you from all that.
Yeah.
No, it's living in me.
It's,
It's
it's,
it's yeah, it's living in me. You have something to say? You have more on that?
well, just to amend what you were saying, I'm sure you may be familiar with the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And,
Yes.
yeah, my wife, she's actually a licensed professional counselor, and she's the one that educates me on all these things. And
Awesome.
right, and so one of the things that I was looking at myself is that you seeing these things are living in your body. It's not the experience itself. And as far as health, as far as stress hormones like cortisol, cortisol is a stress hormone that's induced whenever you're in a stressful situation, but it's bad to stay in your body because it wreaks all kinds of damage. And one of the things with Black people, you have high cases of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, or what they used to call it sugar, and that there's a correlation,
Sugar.
yeah, the sugar. There's this correlation between these stress hormones
Yes.
and who we are, as far as the microaggressions and the things that we deal with as Black people that cause us to be more susceptible to diseases like high blood pressure, diabetes, and the like.
Yeah.
Things that actually live in your body.
Actually live in your body. And again, people don't realize that. And so this is the beauty of this conversation. Chris and I aren't sitting up here just making up stuff to be upset about. In fact, you don't see either of us being upset. We're just having the conversation with you all, with each other, rather, and just wanting to share with you what our experience has been. So if you've gotten this far, listen the rest of the way. Because again, maybe it's going to help you. Maybe it's going to help somebody else you know. And maybe you've already been asking yourselves questions around this. Maybe you've seen it before. Maybe again you didn't have language for it, but now you're starting to. You're starting to get some context for it. You're getting some bones for it. It's going to be helpful for you moving forward. So yeah, Chris, I definitely appreciate your thoughts with that. What does it look like to have your gifts used but your insight ignored? Um, when when it is used, like you said, you could be on this stage, but if you could do something better, maybe we need to, you being a musician, perhaps we could play this chord like this. Maybe we can open the song like this. Maybe we can close the song like this. Maybe the song in the middle of the song goes here on this verse. We do this, but that's not welcomed. What what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, expanding it even further. This is what it looks like. You're on stage almost every single week. And from the times that I've attended the church from 2007 to 2017, 10 years, you're pouring your gift into the room. But year after year, as Black people are killed, names in the news, faces on the screen, the pulpit is silent.
Silent.
No prayers for the families, no public lament, no acknowledgement that Black members sitting in those pews, they also might be hurting. Over that decade, I lost count of the names of the countless people: Trayvon Martin, Erica Garner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Alton
Sandra
Phillips,
Bland.
Sandra Bland. Each time, nothing, silence. And it wasn't just about getting political. It was about not making whiteness uncomfortable.
Hmm.
This because the only people that I could really speak to was my other Black brothers and sisters in the church who understood. And it gave me and others some kind of solace. At least we could discuss it amongst each other. But change isn't affected at that level. The change should come from the leadership. The acknowledgement should come from the leadership, but it never was. It never did. And so by the time 2016 rolled around, I remember this one hit different. I don't know if you remember Philando Castile. This
Hmm.
man was shot. He was killed during a traffic stop right in front of his girlfriend and her 4-year-old daughter. He was
Hmm.
calm. He was respectful. He did everything right. Still, the man didn't make it home that night. That image, that reality, it stayed with me. And it wasn't just another story. And
Yeah.
I couldn't take it anymore after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was having. So I remember sitting in the church the following Sunday, right? Waiting to hear something, a prayer, a moment of silence, anything, a drop, a breadcrumb of compassion. Nothing. We just went on with the service like nothing happened. I knew that at that point in my spirit, I was done. So almost a year to the day. This was in July 2016. And July 6th, that date happened. That happened to Philando Castile. He was killed. July 6th, 2016. And in July 2017, I left. I realized I could no longer give my gift to a space that wanted my music, but could not acknowledge my humanity. That's what betrayal trauma. I would describe that as betrayal trauma. And the writers that I mentioned earlier, Emerson and Bracy, they talk about it in The Religion of Whiteness. This is when the very people that or institutions I would say that you depend on for safety, they're the ones that's causing the harm. The harm comes as much from what's not said than what is actually said. And it gave me the language. And once I had that language, I could finally stop asking if I was overreacting, like you mentioned before. And I knew I wasn't. I was just finally seeing the pattern for what it was.
And I think that for so many people that were in my space, Chris, one of the things that was greatly misunderstood was this. And this is where I started losing people. And at first, I wanted to explain myself. And then I realized that I didn't because they were committed to being who they were and committed to just being in the same space that they wanted to be in the whole time. What was confusing to some of the friends that I had that were white, specifically men, there's two women that I could think of off the top of my head right now who kind of fell out with me over the course of that time that were Caucasian women that I had pastored actually. And those two women, they had a problem. One left. She kind of left in a huff. She left the church in a huff. She was, I heard what you said today, and I just told her. I said, America's not the kingdom, um, and it's not God's favorite country.
It's not Israel.
It's not Israel, right? And I said, and we are to view each other and see each other from the same space. But what people couldn't understand, and this is what I also understood about being interracially married, was that people were like, how could you have a problem with this situation and your wife is white? How could you have a problem with it? So I started to see that they were conflating. Like again, they were struggling with the ideal that Philando Castile, Sandra Bland's, right? That I struggled with these things, the whole George Floyd thing. They were like, why? How? Wait, you got a problem? So their assumption is that my marriage, in some degree, removes me, okay, somehow, Chris, from and gives me a white leaning perspective where I wouldn't embrace. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense.
And so I started to realize you're confused. You still don't see me, and so you're confused by me because you're like, well. And then they were kind of like, well, how does your wife feel? And I was like, well, one, she can speak for herself. Two, I need to tell you that being married to me, she understands things that you will never understand. Those conversations have had to happen in our home. She's been around, she's seen it. She's seen us go to restaurants and the restaurant is clearly available, tables are available, and they try to sit you as far in the back of the restaurant as they possibly can.
A lot of stories
And
in 3 years.
say that again.
A lot of stories during those 33 years.
Lots of stories over these 33 years, right? And so it was so interesting, man, that people, I think what I didn't realize, Chris, was that people thought that my relationship with her had me become light white leaning, and that I would have abandoned my culture and my cultural experiences. But no, I mean, it was clear to me that they didn't understand that, but I also didn't understand that they thought that about me. I really didn't understand that. So that was a shock to me, to some degree, to be quite honest with you, because they really thought, like, hey, why would you be upset about
Yeah.
this at this level?
Yeah, it's like listening to you. There's the conflation comes because of there's two distinct ideas of justice in many people's heads.
Yeah.
And so the one understanding of justice is that this is a personal flaw. These people have personal issues and their heart's not right with Christ. Their heart's not right against you. And so they need to repent or they need to be sorry. They have something that they have to change. So it's an individual thing. So it's individual justice.
Right.
The other sense of justice that we experience, so it's more of a collective justice because the things are systemic. The issues are systemic. So they don't see this as a bigger picture. This is why I started, the whole conversation about the book. I didn't want it to just be relegated to just, Chris's anecdotes and his personal issues, but I wanted to lay the foundation of
Yeah.
these things being studied, by many people, many authors. That is something that is systemic and it's people, it's a system, this religion of whiteness, and that there are protectors and there are people that will enforce it. Like just to reiterate, the veil and the mic. These people they'll do that, and so they don't understand that while you're dealing with what you're dealing with, they just see it as an individual thing. And then so, if you're married to your wife, she has all of this. She's a separate person from you. She has her own ideals, her own
100%.
way of thinking, right? You guys are not, attached at the hip or at the head, but this is what people will do because they don't see that there's two separate systems of the way people look at justice, and how we see justice.
I like that. Two separate systems, 100%. And of course, my wife, not having grown up in my context, certainly there's things that she saw. There were things I had to share with her. There were things I had to talk to her about, or whatever, whatnot. And even still, it still kind of blew her mind because she was like, I don't understand. Like, I don't get it. How this is actually a thing, how people think like this down this pathway. So and so, especially in our faith space, right? So that was a whole nother thing too, right? To be like, man, like, because we both, we've had conversations about, we have 4 kids, so, and 5 grandkids. So it's like one of those things where you're like, hey, you can look at these spaces, right? And see these things happening. But there was conversations in my house that were unique from all kinds of other people's conversations, right? From my kids saying, there are some black kids who accept us, some who don't, some white kids who accept us, some who don't. And, we had to, of course, continue to make them be firm in their identity, their ultimate identity, but also tell them that they didn't need to pick and choose in order to be in spaces with other people either. That people needed to say, hey, I like you, and that's it, period. That's it. And I was like, if you have to do all this changing and maneuvering and becoming somebody else to be in that space, then you absolutely positively you just keep it moving because those are people that clearly you don't need to be associated with. It's
Yeah.
just it's easy. Or they're telling you you're not black enough or you're not, white enough. And then if they box braided their hair or something like that, you had some of the other, black kids would be like, well, who did that for you or this, that, or whatever, so on and so forth. And it's like the same person you go to, right? It's just kind of, you know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
just stuff like that where they were like, we get to be everything. And so it was interesting because we've always told them, no, you just be you, period. You just be you. And so I've also understood too on multiple sides, Chris, that if I was married culturally to the same person, somebody else is still gonna have a problem with me or my wife because of who I am or whatever. And so my focus has always kind of been more on just what is my identity in Christ without putting away these inappropriate, what I like to consider things that are sin. I believe these are sin. I believe that if you can't look your brother or your sister in the eye, I mean, that's what John tells us. How can you say you love God, whom you've never seen, but dislike your brother, whom
Sure.
you do see? It says, how is that even possible? It basically goes on to tell you that you're a liar. It's like it's not possible for you to be like, I love God, who I've never seen, but you, like you, I got a problem with you, who you do see. God's like, nah, that doesn't work. Doesn't
Well,
even work like
yeah,
that.
he even defined it as proof of discipleship of Jesus Christ by the love that you have for one another.
For one another,
Yeah.
100%. And that's where I kind of just draw the line. It's where I tried to stick with them. I'm like, what does the gospel say? That's always been my thing. Like, I'm always like, hey, what does this say? If you can tell me in here, then we got something going. But if you're just telling me some kind of random thought, some kind of thing out there, and they're like, yeah, but you're using the argument against me has been that I was using cultural arguments like BLM. I said, listen, never got behind BLM. I said, but let me tell you what I do get behind. I get behind the fact that I'm made in God's image, and that not only do Black lives matter, but all lives matter. But if Black lives don't matter, then lives can't matter.
Right.
That's just the way it is, right? And so I was like, you think that the organization or the program is the key? Is it? I'm not using that as the key. I'm using this as the key to tell you that no matter what, the moment you dismiss me for your culture and then tell me that I'm using culture to fight your culture, we got a
Right.
problem already. The whole thing is mixed up and it's messed up. The ideal is who are we in Christ, in faith spaces, and the conversations again that we need to be able to have, to be able to move forward and not mimic the world and people who are not born again believers in the kingdom. Like I said, I don't expect people who don't know Jesus to even relate completely to what we're saying. Someone may watch this who doesn't, and they may be like, okay, I get it. I pray they do. But I do, from my white brothers and sisters out there, I 100% expect you to venture down this road and become curious about it and understand it and be informed and stop having people like Chris and I always have to be explained to you or educate you on this. But for you to say, I need to become curious about my brothers and sisters in Christ and the way that I move amongst them and be willing to call out things that you see in the context that you are currently in that um, that don't work,
Yeah.
that aren't right. I have said, Chris, on many occasions, I've had pastors come to me and they say, we know that you had a very multicultural church. How'd you do it? And I said, you got to be intentional. And I said, you got a black dude standing at the door or a black woman standing at the door and she's greeting people. And you're like, well, we got Sister Iverna over here at the door, such and such, so and so. No, he's not making decisions. They know that. We know that. And again, that's one of the things that really caught my attention about your video. We're not making decisions. They want to know, is this person involved with making decisions for this particular ministry? Because if
Right.
they're not, they're just a showpiece that you have standing here, and then you show that they're diverse, but they're not behind the scenes helping you make any choices or decisions.
No,
And
not at
that's
all.
a sad thing. That's a sad thing. So terrible. You've also said this thing that hit deep, that being tolerated is the same as being valued.
Uh, tolerance. You went over so much of it yourself, but tolerance feels like people adjusting. They're adjusting around you, so they don't actually have to adjust themselves. And what value, I think, feels more like you letting, or them letting, at least on that level, your presence change them. Like I said before, I remember when Philando Castile was killed, the silence told me exactly where I stood. My presence was fine, but as long as I didn't require them to feel my pain or to confront what caused it, to not speak about it, that was okay. See, that's tolerance. A seat at the table where you're allowed to eat, but not to speak about what's on the plate. You can give your opinion about things if you're allowed to. And allowed to is the looks that you get, because just being accustomed to talking to people and you're looking for little facial tics, the rolling of the eyes, these kind of things. And you can sense where the conversation is going, and
Yes.
alluded to it
Yes.
well earlier. There's deflection that takes place because people's, you know, idea about what's wrong versus what's right, their value system is going to be different, right? And really, value shows up as, you know, it shows up in proximity and empathy and in change. If a space doesn't shift because you're in it, you weren't really valued. You know, you're just being managed. And I've been in enough spaces to know the difference in my bones. I know.
I love that. I appreciate you for sharing that. For those still leading in those spaces today, what advice would you give them? They're in that space leading right now. What do you say?
People that are leading in that space, again, I would say that you need a community to be able to bounce these things off, to talk to other people. You have your friends there and you have other people. There's a couple things you can do.
Outside of the space you're saying, Chris?
Well, you can leave the church, you know, but outside of the space, I mean, there's other educational resources, you know, that you can take advantage of. Educating yourself too, because once you start to, I was going to reference the books, a couple of other books too, but once you start to name some of the things, like you said before, is deflection. You know, people like to deflect. Uh, Instead of talking about the issue, you see that in my comments, to try to bring people right back to what the issue is, or they spiritualize. You know, that's another thing that people like to do. Or, you know, you
Yeah.
have what's known in debating is like an ad hominem attack. Like they'll
Ad
attack,
hominem. Yep.
right? They'll attack you as the person, or you're, you know, you're stupid. I've been called, I'm a liar. You know, so you have these kind of things that take place, and they once you start to name these things, though, it helps you to see it for what it is, and you don't take it personally, because what you're looking at is a system that's been in place for some time, and
Yeah.
people are part of it. They wouldn't call it the religion of whiteness, but they're in that space, and you're sharing in that space as well with them. So you have to educate yourself, because when if you can, when you can, speak to the leaders and speak to people, you're not just coming from just an emotional standpoint so you can be dismissed.
I like
Like,
that.
angry, I'm this and that and the other. But you can talk facts. You can talk how, you know, from your experience, what you've seen, what is represented in other churches. And the funny thing is, people they don't mind change. They just don't like being changed. And so when you come with, you know, different ideas, it's just the truth. When you
No, it
when you
is the truth. It is the
when
truth.
you you know, when you come with different ideas, it challenges their I'm going to name drop here. There's another guy. He's an author, Jonathan Haidt. I think he might even be an atheist, but he wrote a book, a very good book. It's called The Righteous Mind, and he talks
Mm,
about these different moral foundations that we have, and a lot of people that, like us, we have a hurt and harm foundation, but then you have on the other side, you have a sanctity foundation, a sanctity or pride. You know, especially when it comes to national pride, these kind of things, they look at it as an immoral, something that's injustice. So you're coming at you're butting against that, you know, whenever and people tie their foundations onto who they are. So you're going against a person's ego. You're going against them individually, especially when you bring these things up. This is largely why I think people get angry and they get mad, and
yeah.
they take things personal. But, you know, more so as a solution, I think that educating yourself, putting words to what you feel so you can speak to these people that are in these positions to change things, join communities, you
Right.
know, people online.
Right.
Because, you know, telling somebody you didn't bring up the latest shooting about, you know, from a black man, it's going to be dismissed. uh Jesus is coming soon, or we're all headed to heaven, so this the skin thing, you know, doesn't matter. You're just wasting your time talking about this, and that's the idea that people get. I couldn't imagine though using that same energy and reason in other areas of our life, like my marriage, with my kids, friends. We're probably going to fight again. So there's no point in resolving this fight to it. Just might as well
Right.
just not just ignore it.
Right.
I'm going to be hungry again, so I might as well either just keep eating all the time or just not eat.
Right.
It's not, it doesn't make sense. Like it's the perfect example of being so heavenly minded, earthly good.
Mm.
We have issues here, and we need to deal with it. We need to straighten them out, because we can't have peace among our brethren if we don't bring these things to the fore. We don't have these conversations. It's not going to change in a day, in a week, but at least have the conversation.
At
But if,
least at least
if you
have the
can't have the conversation,
conversation.
yeah, then you have to think about other things, like maybe that space isn't for you. Maybe they're not ready for it. But
Yeah.
do that.
And
You start.
and I think there's something to be said about that from the question that the person asked me, that maybe that space isn't ready for it. But it's kind of like where I live here. I live in Arizona. So it's kind of like where I live here, man, people are like, "You live there?" And I'm like, "Yes, I do." And no one's going to tell me that I can't live here. And if you don't like it, there's a realtor somewhere in this community that you can stick a sign right in your front yard and they can sell your house, because I'm not moving.
It's a good market too.
That's you understand what I'm saying? I'm like, I'm not moving. I'm like, this ideal of I have to adjust again. I have to edit again. I
Right.
have to be the one that somehow has to acquiesce to this tension. I have to make everybody else around me feel comfortable. We're not doing that. We're just not doing it. In fact, I'll tell you what I did, and then I have two things, and then we're going to wrap up. When here recently, when we had the shootings, there was a lot of rhetoric on the community pages, and um, I called because I knew our local police chief was black, so I called and I said, hey, he and I had done some work together in the community. I had done some things. He came, he spoke to some of the kids at our church when I was pastoring and stuff like that. When all this stuff started going down, some of the shootings started going down. I brought our kids in because a lot of our kids um, were African American kids, and we had some Hispanic kids, and we had some white kids. But they all wanted to have some conversation around this stuff. So I brought in, he was kind enough to do that. But I had to when I first built this house, I had to talk to the people in the community, the police and the others, and I said, "Now I'm gonna be walking my dog with my hat turned on backwards, and I may have on a jersey, and sometimes I may go out here with a hoodie on, because although it's 1:15 today here in Arizona, in the winter, in the morning when I walk at 5 o'clock and it's dark, it's 32 degrees outside. Now it's going to end up being about 70. We're going to get that 30 to 40 degree swing by the time the day is up. But right now it's
It's 30
32.
degrees. It's cold.
Cold. So it's like, I just want to walk my dog like everybody else in the neighborhood. Right. And so I had to say that. I literally had to say that so that I didn't get somebody, well, there's a man and he's just walking. I'm just walking my dog, just like you would just walk your dog. And I'm not going to not wear the hoodie so that you could be comfortable. It's cold outside. I'm gonna have on a stocking cap, not a stocking cap, a cap though,
Yeah.
um, and a hoodie because it's cold.
Yeah.
Sorry, it just is. And so cold here too. It's not New York cold, but it's cold. If it's 32 degrees in Arizona, I promise you it's cold. And so anyway, my point is that the whole changing for space thing, I think that's necessary if you're in a space where you realize that there's nothing that you can say and they're not willing to listen to what you have to say. I think that you have to use some wisdom and some discernment and say, am I fighting a battle that I don't need to fight? And are you willing to die on that hill? I'm not sure it's always necessary like that. It's something that we need to consider, right? So let me ask you this. What do you think for the future, and for the people who are hearing this, we'll wrap up. What does belonging really look like in those spaces? Chris? What does it really look like to uh, belong? And and attached to that, what gives you hope that these things can potentially be turned around?
True belonging, it starts before you even touch an instrument or a microphone. All right. It's going to be seen before
I
you
love
start.
that.
All right. So too often in white led spaces, value is measured by what you can do for the program, not by who you are when you walk into the door. So that has to be established. I think for me, true belonging would mean leadership that listens even when things are uncomfortable. It treats your cultural perspective as an asset, not a liability or something that they have to manage. And it's not just allowing Black people in the room, it's letting that presence actually change the culture for the better. And I think for people that are coming behind me, right, I want them to walk into a church and not have to run their whole identity through a filter first. I want them to be able to bring their sound, their style, their voice, all of it, without wondering who's over there keeping score, who's watching.
Mm.
Safe ground to me, it isn't just, we didn't hurt you today. It's we understand you, we respect you, and we're willing to actually be shaped by you, by your culture. And if that's not there, it isn't belonging. It's kind of just a nicer cage. And the second thing that you asked about,
Hope.
yeah, hope. Now, what gives me hope really is more of us naming the thing now, as I mentioned before. We're not just ghosting these spaces quietly anymore. We're going to tell the truth, find each other and then refuse to
Absolutely.
be gaslit and thinking, well, it's just us. There's nothing wrong with the system. But for me personally, this religion of whiteness was really huge. These authors, Emerson and Bracy, they basically handed me a map to a maze I didn't even know I've been wandering in for years.
Mm.
Now, when I see someone else looking confused in that maze, at least I can say, hey, look, here's where this dead end leads. Here's an out. This is what you can actually do. But I also see new communities forming outside these old structures. These are places where our culture isn't garnish or just, prettiness, but it's part of the foundation. And if every time, someone creates this from a place of wholeness, it's like they're leaving the door open for the next person to come inside. And as I mentioned before, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not fast work. You don't have a conversation and then a light bulb just flash over somebody's head. It's not fast and it's not going to be easy. Right. But knowing that I'm not alone, knowing that there are others like yourself who are willing to rebuild, who are willing to wrestle, it kind of encourages me, it keeps me going, and even when the temptation is just to just pack it in and just say, forget it. And some days that hope is enough just to keep me moving forward. That's why I was excited about this conversation.
Man, I appreciate you. I want to encourage people to get that book. I think it'll be well worth reading. The subtitle is How Racism Distorts the Christian Faith. It is on Amazon. Michael Emerson and Glenn Bracy, along with narrator Tom Parks. And so, if you get the Audible book, so you encourage me. Um,
Thank you.
I also prayerfully, I'd love to have you again with Scott Lloyd. Have you seen Scott Lloyd on TikTok? Scott is a scholar on race and religion.
Okay.
He's Caucasian. Scott is spot on. He was another TikTok guy. We connected. We started talking. Started hearing this stuff. He saw my video from that point in that time, and he was like, man, he's like, this is it. And of course, I was getting called all kind. I was getting called all out of my name and all kinds of stuff, and so on and so forth, or whatever, whatnot. But and I know not to respond necessarily to those people, but Scott and I got on and we started talking about just his history and where he came from. But my point is I'd love to have both you and Scott on in this space. I want to keep conversations going on around this. And because it's kind of like this, I don't want to just scream into the wind because when the wind blows, then it goes away, right? For one moment it was there, then it goes away. But this is my own personal thoughts, and I'll have you finish with any final thoughts that you have here too. This is what I really believe, Chris, with all of my heart. I don't believe that the body of Christ, Christ's followers, the church, can experience the ambassadorship that it is supposed to have, the authority, the power, the love, the grace, the mercy, the effectiveness that it's supposed to have, while its people can't even worship in the same spaces and be in the same places and be equal while not in gifting, but in value regarding purpose. I'm not you. I can sing, but you don't want me to play an instrument. You do not want me to try to play an instrument at all. And this is beautiful. I was teaching my Bible study class, which, by the way, for those of you who see this, is online. All you have to do is send us an email and tell you that you're in, and we put you in. All that information will be in the notes in the video. But I was teaching them about all the gifts, and I said, you got to be careful. I said, the scripture's pointing out to us here in Corinthians that God gave all these gifts to the body. And just because you're gifted in this area doesn't mean that you can help everybody who crosses your path. There's got to
Right.
be somebody else. So I might have to send somebody to Chris because Chris's gift is the right gift for this person. That doesn't minimize my gift. That doesn't take away from my gift. I even told them that oftentimes what I would do for the two nonprofits that I ran and two churches that I planted, that I always made sure that I brought people into the room who were the right people in the room. Like the book, Good to Great, right? You got to get the right people on the bus. Um, I don't need somebody because you're a prayer warrior to try to draw up drawings for me for a building I'm trying to acquire.
Right.
I need an architect
For
who
him.
understands what needs to happen here, where we could cut costs, where we could do things, so on and so forth, to be able to get into this facility and do it successfully and safely. And I appreciate that you're praying, but that's where I need you to be. I need you to be in that prayer space. You're a prayer warrior, man, pray. But I need this other person in this room with me here. I appreciate you, but this is who I need in this room to help me with this. And so I think until we get there, Kristen, I think that we have to keep pressing the gas. We have to keep pressing the gas. This is not about hate, folks, by the way. I just want to be clear on that. This isn't about hating anybody. This is about just bringing to light something that I believe is ungodly and has kept us from becoming all that we can ultimately be.
Yes.
So I want to give you a final word and tell people how they can also connect with you.
Yeah, again, I just want to thank you for this opportunity, to be on here, to be able to talk about how we can move forward as a body of believers. And it's not about hate. Hate, it can push people forward. We've seen that historically what it did, but it doesn't last. And what we are building this on, really, understandably or not, is love, because love is what pushes us forward as a people. When we can understand where we come from, we can understand our different plights, when we can actually discuss these things respectfully and not in a way where people are gaslit, where subjects are deflected or people are personally attacked, but in a place that's from fairness, from equity, from just being able to say, hey, look, man, I'm not you. I haven't lived your life, but I'm certainly willing to sit with you. I'm certainly willing to have this conversation with you because I believe this is how we can collectively move forward as a body of believers. And yeah, I'm looking forward to, this conversation with, myself,
Scott.
you and
Yeah.
Scott. It'd be incredible. I'd love that. And where you can find me, it's because I'm starting to push some more of these videos out. I had my channel. I'm actually moving from my content from Gospel Progressions University, and the comment on the church commentary is going to be on my new TikTok account after the Amen. I actually have a YouTube account as well, youtube.com/after the Amen. I believe it is. You can find that as well. After underscore the underscore Amen, because I think the name was taken. I'm on there. I'm also on Instagram at After the Amen. And I'm launching a community. It's after the amen community.com. And there I have it. It's after the amen community.com/7 signs. And there you can download a free guide. And I get into some of these things, but some of the the issues that people face in church, some of the trauma that folks face in different situations where people are controlled and spiritually abused.
Awesome. So that's where you guys can catch up with Chris. Chris, again, thank you so much, man. It's been enlightening, powerful, gracious, kind, truthful. And I'm blessed, man, to just have had this opportunity to hang out with you. Make sure that you follow Chris. I will get all that information from him, and it will be linked underneath the podcast. Make sure that you go check that out. It's Belonging Life. Go to the YouTube. It's Belonging Life. And of course, you can catch me on TikTok at Belonging Life as well. The podcast is on Spotify and wherever else they send it to, but Spotify for sure, just Belonging Life. Super excited about, again, this opportunity. As Chris is building a community, we have started a community 6 months ago. We're growing. We appreciate all of you who've been coming over to the YouTube channel, to the TikTok channel, and also to the online Bible study. We're going to continue on with this. And again, I hope that you appreciate what we brought to the table today with hopes to build a better community and unity amongst our brothers and sisters in Christ, which is ultimately our aim. So we appreciate y'all. Y'all be blessed. Thanks for hanging out.